Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be participating today to this panel on the green finance in Africa. My name is Marie-Laure Mazot. I'm Deputy Chief Executive Officer at STOA. I will be the moderator today. I have a great range of panelists today with Leila Kamdem Futso, who is a partner in financial services at Mazars. She's our expert in our panel. And among the speakers, we have Mohamed El Kettani, Chief Executive Officer of Attijariwa Bank, Gregory Clement, who's the CEO of Proparco, and Mrs. Amy So, who's the CEO for Uba Group. We also have a guest of honor, Amadou Od, who's the Minister of the Economy, Planning and International Cooperation from the Republic of Senegal. So as an introduction, I'd like to remind what we call green finance, which gathers the green bonds or climate bonds, green funds, taxonomy development, ESG investment, and rights to pollute. We also have investments in renewable energies and infrastructures that service the local population and allow for the economic development of the countries. Today, the continent is only contributing to 4% of CO2 emissions. It's very low. On the contrary, it is one of the main victims of climate change. Financial resources necessary to mitigate those impacts are the IMF thinks that the deficit is $50 billion per year, and most of those countries are in Africa. Public finances cannot address those needs, so there's a need for scaling, and we need the private sector to really play a booster role in parallel to the public sector. So I will ask Leila Kamdem, as the expert, to give us an overview today of the gap between the resources and the needs in the continent. Leila, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the slide. So the climate and environmental crisis is the defining challenge of our time. And COVID-19 is a very frightening example of the pandemics we might have to face more frequently if we continue to damage nature. COP26, the climate summit at the end of this year, is widely seen as our last chance to avoid a climate disaster. Africa cannot afford to stay behind the curve, and we see many African countries taking strong climate action already. But the proportion of climate finance flows reaching Africa is extremely low, as we can see on this slide. 50 billion of USD per year. This is the estimated size of the gap in adaptation funding for the continent. And adaptation really is a top priority because this region is the most exposed, as Marie-Laure was saying, and also the least prepared to face climate shocks. And funding is also required for climate mitigation. The global mitigation target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero and ultimately limit global warming well below 2 degrees in line with the Paris Agreement. Getting to net zero is a challenge and a very different challenge depending on the side of the planet you live. While for the developed world, it's about finding low carbon ways to continue to live decently, for African countries, the difficulty lies in balancing climate with development needs. How can African economies continue to grow, give everyone access to basic energy services, build essential infrastructure, and all of this while continuing to keep emission low? Another stat I wanted to show is the green bond gap on this slide. As you can see, with 3.5 billion USD of green bond issuance in Africa in 2020 compared to 1 trillion globally, the African green bond market is significantly underdeveloped. So in a nutshell, current levels of green finance fall far short. Clearly, not one single source of financing is likely to cover the whole bill. All options, national and international, public and private, have to work together. And the financial industry has no option but to contribute. It's about corporate social responsibility, but not only. It also makes good business sense because the climate crisis generates major financial risks and also once-in-a-generation opportunities that banks and investors cannot ignore. Now, if we look at the sectors that offer these opportunities on this slide, based on countries' nationally determined contributions, the list of priority sectors includes energy, agriculture, and forestry. And first of all, on energy, about 60% of people have no reliable access to clean and affordable energy on the continent. And energy needs are expected to increase by 80% in the next 30 years, with a doubling of the population, the African population, and fourfold growth of the economy. With the abundance of solar, wind, and geothermal resources available on the continent, renewable energy is really seen as the low-hanging fruit. On the slide, we have highlighted two examples of energy projects. First, the Benban Solar Park in Egypt. With a total capacity of 1.8 gigawatts, this is a $4 billion USD project, and it's one of the largest solar power plants in the world. It was co-financed by IFC, international lenders, and also private banks. And the second example is from Biovea Energy. It's a joint venture between EDF, Meridiam, and Biocala. And it's a project in Côte d'Ivoire to build a 46 megawatt biomass power facility that uses agricultural waste as fuel. Financial partners include the French Development Agency, Proparco, and the Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund. And now moving to agriculture, here we have the Great Green Wall. So it's a project which aims at building 8,000 kilometers long of vegetation spanning 11 countries, starting from Senegal, from Djibouti, and ending in Djibouti. And the Great Green Wall will help fight desertification and promote agroforestry to boost food security. This project has recently received 14 billion USD in new funding from the African Development Bank, the French government, and the World Bank. And to finish on forestry, we have the project here that is aiming at tackling environmental degradation in the Congo Basin in Central Africa. It's an area that contains 70% of Africa's forest cover, and that is one of the largest natural carbon sinks in the world. So this project is financed by international lenders and Central African governments. So clearly there is no shortage of opportunities. The challenge is about using public money more efficiently to mobilize private money and upscale climate finance. And for this to happen, policymakers have a crucial role to play in creating an enabling environment. First and foremost, we need governments to build country transition roadmaps. An interesting example is the Pathways to Just Transition initiative, which took place in South Africa. It was a dialogue between the government, businesses, labor, and civil society to identify concrete actions to get to net zero. Secondly, we need governments to put in place the right fiscal policies. Following South Africa's Carbon Tax Act in 2019, other countries on the continent, including Senegal, are also working on carbon taxes currently. And to finish, we also need central banks to integrate green issues in financial regulation. Some central banks have started already, like Bank Al Maghrib of Morocco, who really has taken the lead on this on the continent. So now looking ahead, and this will be my final slide, climate change is everyone's business. And the role of finance in collaboration with governments and policymakers cannot be overstated. First, the financial industry needs to increase its awareness of green opportunities and leverage blended finance tools to capture those. Secondly, governments are key for defining transition pathways to provide certainty to investors and also for introducing supportive fiscal policies. And lastly, central banks have a role to play in integrating environmental issues in financial regulation. Riding the green wave for African finance is certainly mission difficult, but with active engagement and collaboration between all stakeholders, it is definitely mission possible. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Leila, pour cette.
Thank you very much, Leila, for this overview on the ambitions, the hurdles, the needs, the opportunities presented by the green finance investment. So our panelists, which will start the discussion now, have a clear overview. Again, for both opportunities and hurdles. So we are going to have all the speakers participate. My first question will be for Mr. Mohamed El Kettani. As South Africa, Morocco has been leader on green finance. I would like to know, concerning your group, Atishawi Farabank, how did your group react on this subject? What about the needs? What about your actions? Thank you, Mrs. Mazo. I'm very happy to be here. I think, first of all, that a bank needs a proper frame to be able to engage and help support big infrastructure projects. This is the case in Morocco because sustainable development is enshrined in the constitution. We have a legal framework for private-public partnerships and with, continuous evolution. During last year, there were amendments to have an update of the legal frame, and we have a vision from the government, including the top of the ladder with His Majesty the King of Morocco, because we want to have 52% of our mix in renewable by 2030. We are nearly at 43% thanks to wind and water energy. So our bank has developed expertise, human expertise in financing projects and infrastructure since the 1990s. And we have been a leader for several years in our country, in Morocco, for financing infrastructures. And regarding renewable energies, we have funded over the last 5 years a whole range of solar and wind energy projects with 1,700 megawatts financed by our bank. It's a syndicated project, and right now in our portfolio, renewables are 25% of all of our project finance in infrastructures, which shows our real appetite and our real interest for this activity. And we have created a structure. We have participated in the first green bond that was emitted in Morocco for a solar farm called Noor, promoted by Mazer. And we will have 2,000 megawatt solar production of energy. And this model will be rolled out in other areas, in other countries where we operate. And as an example, I can mention that we are the leader for the national project for 1.2 billion euros and another one for 400 megawatts. We are also leader on another project for depollution of the Cocody Bay, which has a big impact on the Abidjan city. We are also leader in another project for 250 megawatts in Ras El Oued in Egypt, and many other examples. So today, the green financing and all the demands and constraints linked to sustainable development are in our policies, and we are really aware of the risk, but we are even experts at this because those projects are very precise and they demand very high-level experts. We are also spending a lot of money on the long run, and some prerequisites from the banking sector are necessary to be even more involved. And lastly, we were the first African bank to receive the accreditation from the UN Green Fund, the Green Climate Fund, which is operational today and which, as you know, allows us to use a lot of money over the long run with very good rates. And maturity and costs are two necessary conditions to have success in such projects.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kettani, for the opportunity to give a clear picture of your situation in Morocco and more globally on the African continent. So now I would like to ask something to Mrs. Annie So. So she's the Regional Director for Central Africa for the UBA Group. So we would like to know what is your diagnosis on green finance in Africa and how your group can intervene in this framework, because I think that your group is present in 19 different African countries with different offices everywhere in Africa. So I would really like to know what is your point of view. Thank you very much, Marie-Laure. So indeed, it is interesting to underline that there is an interesting growth of green finance and especially an increased interest for the green bonds in Africa. Since the very first green bond issuance in South Africa, the bond issuance of 5 states were added to the list of the market participants. For example, Morocco and Nigeria decided to become leaders of this new dynamic. They have a good level of maturity on that. They developed their national frameworks and they decided to take interesting initiatives in order to develop that in their countries. Nigeria is the only country issuing a green bond certified African in Africa, and in South Africa it is more at a regional level, and it was the same for the Seychelles Island and Namibia. Among the most dynamic stakeholders of the market, it is possible to mention the financial institutions and the development multilateral banks such as the African Development Bank, the International Bank for the Rebuilding and the Development, and the IFC. Their actions are mostly noticed by direct investments for green bonds issued by other African entities, or because they issue green bonds whose incomes are used for projects in order to thwart climate change or with positive impact on the environment. They can also help African issuers for the issuance of green bonds, or can also help the consolidation of their capacities. The IFC, for example, was strongly involved in the strengthening of their capacities with the regulators. There is a huge potential here to mobilize private capital of the public sector in order to fund transitional projects with a low carbon emission and other national and international development projects. However, Africa doesn't really benefit from it because since the first issuance of South Africa in 2012, only 17 transactions followed. At the global world level, the issuance of green bonds reached an aggregated total of $774 billion between 2007 and 2014. And there is a study of the African Development Bank in 2004, which shows that the cost of climate change in Africa for 2030 reached $40 million each year. And between 2004 and 2011, Africa just only got $232 million. The reasons why there is this gap are numerous, and of course we can talk, for example, of the states lacking the possibility to have access to funds because they don't have the right admissibility criteria. We can also notice the issues when it comes of governance and coordination in the fund leverage for the fight against climate change. The opportunities are limited, and the resources and human resources as well. It is also more difficult to get huge funds in Africa. That's why many regulators decided to announce the Basel III two agreements, or the IFRS agreement standards, in order to build a sound and sustainable financial sector able to attract more funding opportunities. The UEA group is present in many countries in Africa and decided to adopt the equatorial principles in order to implement healthy practices for the environment management and to really adjust to the situation. UEA decided on initiating projects positive for the environment. In 2016, we decided to give $250 million in order to fund infrastructures and SMEs, taking into account these new national international necessities. To conclude, I would like to underline that Africa has a huge hydropower potential, solar potential, and wind energy potential, because we are for 2050, but in 2050. We will be the most populated continent in the world, and we only got 4% of the funds dedicated to climate, even though we are the most impacted by climate change. The reforms should be really implemented in order to build an harmonized legal framework, and Africa should become a leading continent for the production of renewable energy, since we have a huge sources of energy in our territory, and hence we could become the main source of green finance. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to know a little bit more about the situation. I would like to give the floor to Grégory in order to understand how Propenco can accompany the green finance and how is it possible to support the local financial stakeholders in order for them to be more able to fund green projects. Yes, thank you very much, Marie-Laure, for giving me this opportunity to intervening. Indeed, we talk a lot about a green wave when it comes to the African continent. In our specific situation, I think that it is crucial to really explain what we mean by a green wave. We talk about an industrial wave and then a financial wave. So briefly, I will try to describe them. When we talk about the industrial wave, we can see a huge decrease of the investment costs, which are possible thanks to energy costs coming from renewable energy, which leads to tariffs far more competitive than the ones coming from oil, for example. And since most of the time it has a huge impact on the budgets of the states and the different governments. So here is the first element about this wave. First of all, it is an industrial wave. However, it is also a financial wave. We can already notice it. We've talked about an inflow of international funds available to fund green projects. The Green Climate Fund was already mentioned here, and it is possible to get subsidies. So when it comes to energy efficiency. It is still possible to find projects, but still we need to adjust, even if those projects are really necessary. We know that countries in the continent are deeply impacted by the impacts of climate change, and it is particularly the case in different sectors, for example, in the agricultural sector, but we can also see the deterioration of the shores. So there is a concentration of different sectors which decided to focus on the climate and the green energies. Propanco would like to really foster the initiatives of its partners in the continent. I'm talking about the credit institutions, the banks, the networks with the strategies and presence in the field in order to encourage everyone to change on this topic. So we are really trying to give them the right resources in order for them to build capacities and change their position in renewable energy project in a small scale or in a bigger scale. And a few examples were already mentioned. For example, when we talk about the green bond issuances, for example, we participated in the structuration of the ECP green bond issuance. It lasted for 10 years, and it was a way for us to propose specific loans in order to create wind farms, and Propanco was with the ISI for this project, and I think that it was more than 130 million euros project. There are also other tools that we decided to use with banking partners. So, for example, we have the Standard Bank in Namibia, with which we had a partnership, and it allowed the bank to really find its positioning on the funding of a solar project for 15 years. So it was a rather long project, especially because of the maturity of the Namibian market. And it was done thanks to the guarantee provided by Propanco, and the guarantee was progressive. So it means that the coverage was increasing with the maturity of the project until the full coverage of the projects. It was interesting because hence the central bank could provide the cash in a local currency, and then it could really establish a project thanks to the guarantee. It was called the Unlock project that we decided to use in Namibia, and we will really try to upscale it with other banking partners in the continent. There is also another way to accompany partners. It is to really develop their climate ambitions. So, for example, we can accompany the bank with the assessment of their performance and the crashes of the systems in order to see how they can have an impact on the environment. So we did it with the European Development Agency, and with Propanco, it is something that we really try to do. We decided to start with this initiative with the French Agency for Development and Assisting Bank, and we also try to experiment with other partners, not in Africa, but in Latin America. However, we would like to implement it in Africa as well. Many different projects are currently in progress, and one of them is with a bank in Nigeria. So we will try to really put everything into place rather rapidly. Propanco is really trying to establish a climate framework in a way with its partners, and some of these projects will start since in the second semester of this year. It will lead to very concrete exchanges with managers, CEOs, and commercial management teams of the different banks, in order for them to have a better understanding of the risks that they can face with the different projects that they have. And last but not least, we work on the creation of green assets with the banks, focusing on high stake sectors. So, for example, with the production of energy from renewable energy, the energy efficiency, and we would like to have a more sustainable agriculture. So in Propanco, we provide different initiatives, especially targeting the most contaminating countries. So, for example, we were present in Egypt, in South Africa, or in Nigeria, which represents around 60% of the CO2 emissions of the African continent. And I'm not the one saying that. The Global Carbon Atlas is stating this. So upstream really try to assess the markets, to really identify the segments, even though they are not very mature at the moment, but we are really trying to cooperate with the banks in order for them to better identify their projects, to create adjusted products, and also to identify and train the teams of the banking partners in the banking system in order to identify projects which can be a little out of the box compared with what they're used to doing. And also we try to help them getting public fundings, especially for technical assistance, especially financial help for their projects, mobilizing fundings from the Green Fund, from the TFSC program, which is a program that we created with the Green Fund, which is a way to transform the financial system for climate. And Propanco should conclude very soon fundings with partners in South Africa and Egypt, but also with other countries in the continent for 300 million euros. It is really feasible in those countries. There is only one condition that we need to meet. The public authorities need to have the clear will to go in the right way, and the environment should be positive in order to welcome those funds. And without the public action, those programs couldn't exist.
Thank you very much, Grégory. That's a great transition to now ask our guest of honor, Mr. Amadou Hott, the Minister of Senegal, especially on the involvement of his country in promoting green finance. So, Mr. Minister, I'd like to ask you this question. What about the initiatives that the authorities and yourself are implementing to promote the green finance? What role would you like to play? And how do you support those initiatives in order to allow the private sector to accompany them and, spread the effort? Thank you very much. First, I would like to congratulate you on this important initiative, which is to support the green economy. I can see some of the faces I've actually met before. We've worked together in Senegal with Proparco, for instance, on a project of 30 megawatt. And I'd like to stress the fact that for us, it's about seizing the opportunities present today, especially globally, with the resources that are available at the Green Fund for the Climate. We recently received 75 million euros for a project. It's a big step. It's the biggest amount of money we've received so far for a green finance project. And now it's about after approval, it's always difficult. I think that some of you know about it. First, you have to sign the document, but then it takes a lot of time. Many procedures need to be followed. So we really need now to spend this money that we've received. Speaking of Senegal in particular, and beyond this project of green financing and also with scaling solar, we must say that our country is one of the top 3 African countries to adhere to the international platform for green finance with Benin and Morocco. This gives us access to more investment and fundings, green fundings. Over the last decade, our country has implemented major initiatives to really put our development in the path of green economy. And I'd like to share the fact that the transition towards the green economy is one of the major pillars of our policy in our plan in Senegal. And we are really implementing this new strategy. We also have a national strategy to promote green jobs in order to reduce poverty by using public investment in order to have a long and sustainable economic growth by 2035. As I've said before, Senegal has succeeded in getting some green financing, but we need to move forward. Senegal is also putting in place a national climate fund to mobilize resources by trying to create a sort of carbon tax while maintaining a balance. We cannot have projects that can become too costly. So we need to have a quick development. We are late in the development rhythm, so we need to catch up, and we need to invest in the access to energy. So what is the balance that we can have between the speeding up to have an access to energy, not only for electricity in rural areas, but also to allow our industries to have an affordable cost of energy so that they can stay or become competitive, to allow for the import substitution, because we cannot produce, if we are not competitive locally, we are going to keep on importing. But we need to do that while thinking of the impact on climate. And we know, for instance, that some projects in the solar sector cannot always be adjusted to our system. So we need to invest more to make our networks more robust, so we can have intermittent energy, because this is costly. And who is supposed to pay? Is it the states, even though we already have other commitments on creating jobs, building hospitals, training schools, universities, etc.? We have other infrastructures such as roads, ports, railroads. So we need to have more international resources in a concessional way, and they need to be accessible, affordable, like Green Funds for Climate. Those 75 million euros that we've received are here to last for 40 years. The grace rate is 10 years, and the interest rate is 0%. But we need more volume, quicker, so that we can also strengthen our energy systems to welcome more green funding. And also, as Achitari Bank did and the African Development Bank, we had a big project in Cameroon for 400 megawatts. It was a way to strengthen the energy at the basic level, allowing the country to have more intermittent energy. And for the base load, usually it's hydroelectrical energy, but also gas, thermal energy. But if we can do more hydroelectricity and maybe avoid the other polluting energies, then you have the basics to have more intermittent energy and have a more interesting energy mix. For Senegal, in our current plan that we validated recently, we have many projects which could be of interest to the investors. I'm thinking, for instance, of the solarization of pumping stations all around the rural areas for agriculture. This is a big project. We're doing the feasibility study right now. And after, we'd like to have a blend funding, private sector, but also concessional funding. Also, another big project is the Big Green Wall, covering 11 countries. In Senegal, it's going to be over 500 square kilometers, which will be furbished with trees. And of course, this is costing money, so we need more resources, public money, in order to allow the private sector to get in this area and then benefit the local population. So the private sector is not funding this project of adding trees, you know, as far as I know. So, for instance, it's public funding or, you know, development partners. We have already done a big share of this project, and it's public money. And coming back to this big green wall, there's this Desert to Power project with the African Development Bank that we launched when I was working there. And now we have clearly identified projects in 5 out of those 11 countries: Senegal, Mauritania, Niger, Mauritania, and another one. And these are interesting projects, especially regarding production of energy with PPP projects. Thank you. L'oratrice n'a pas mis son micro. L'interprète remercie l'orateur qui a prévenu la modératrice. I'm sorry about this micro problem. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your ideas. It's very interesting regarding investing in Senegal. Beyond the project that you mentioned, it's a good way to go back to Mr. El Kettani, sorry, to ask him, you know, as a banker, faced with those challenges, what are the instruments that you will favor in the coming years in order to, you know, face up the challenges? Thank you, Madame Mazot. I'd like to go back to what the Minister has just said. It was most interesting. I wrote down 2 main points, because they will have an impact on the rolling out of a real policy to absorb the deficit in a reasonable timing, especially for clean energy in Africa. Because without energy, we can come up with any development plan, but we will never be able to create it. There's no industrialization without electricity. It would be a pure fictional thing. So first, he mentioned the speeding up of the development. So governance has to be improved, you know, be it with institutions or commercial banks. How can we improve the efficiency of the rolling out and the financing? And second, how can we embark, how can we have everyone in the infrastructures project, especially the green projects? And according to me, the commercial banks they know how to use the short-run money savings. We make money out of transformation, and part of our resources in local money are placed on, you know, middle-run or long-term investments. And by the way, I'd like to pay a tribute to the actions by Proparco, but as an institution interested in funding development projects with a high maturity, we have good solutions. So I think that the instruments that we should use very quickly are about multiplying the possibilities of co-financing between institutions, multilateral institutions and commercial banks, in order to have innovative solutions. As Mr. Clément mentioned, in Namibia, it can be of very good interest for all countries. So we need to develop infrastructure funds because investors, qualified investors, are interested, be them African or international investors. They are looking at return on investment rates that are interesting. And I think in Africa we are very attractive. The rates are really, really interesting compared to Europe or advanced countries. So Africa is a great opportunity for investors, but it demands something very important, which is improving our governance, our institutional governance at the level of our continent. And I think that a lot of countries have seen a great evolution recently, but still there's much to be done. And we need to implement or modernize the laws about contracts on public-private partnerships, because they give some kind of comfort to the international investors to, participate in these projects in order to get infrastructure funds. So I pay tribute to the BAT initiative for the fund that was created recently, but we also need other infrastructure funds, especially for clean energy. We must also think of the role of central banks. Our work was fruitful with the Moroccan Central Bank because they were very sensitive to the fact that to move forward, we need an easing of the different financial criteria. And as you know, as a commercial bank, what we have is equity. The more equity we have, the bigger our capacity is to finance big projects. So the central bank in Morocco moved one step forward with the PPP projects. When they are nicely designed, when they are deemed good, now we are able to get a good result with very good ratios. And that allows us to move forward. And also, this bank did something else. They allow the investors to deconsolidate in the frame of their project with regards to the balance sheet. So this is also a comfort element for the investors because you can deconsolidate. So it's really a project finance. Now, if we talk about the capital market, as I said before, we do the transformation of resources in local money for the middle and long run, but we still want, through this capital market, to be able to go deeper through some incentive initiatives for investors, insurance, pension funds, so they have local currency. It's not about recreating the wheel. Those exist in other countries. It's just about activating the reform of capital markets.
Just in order to facilitate the fundings of green projects, because, for example, if it is possible for us to securitize those debts, and if you can be in contact with institutions, and maybe if we could have a collective savings thanks to established prerequisites, it may be easier for us to strengthen our capacities in order to finance new investment projects in the same area. And when it comes to the diversifications that should be key in the capital market, we should offer derivative products. So, for example, we could have swap rates, we could We should have market mechanisms, but everything should be done at the same time, because if you decide on a reform, it won't have the same impact if you don't have an holistic vision. You should have a global strategic vision, changing the transformation in the commercial banks, also the change of the capital markets, the strengthening of the capital market, and the change in the and governance of the institutions in order to be stronger. But we shouldn't put aside the local market, which benefits from interesting resources. Thank you, Mr. Kettani. Now I would like to ask again a question to Annie So. I would like her to know if she has something else to say on this, about this dynamic of the green finance in Africa. I would like her to be short because we have less than 10 minutes and I would like everyone to intervene. So if you could explain your point of view in 2 to 3 minutes, it would be wonderful. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question. Please go ahead. Okay, so let me ask you again the question, because Mr. Kettani talked about the acceleration of the green finance through different tools. Should we talk about the access to personal capital, to private capital, the access to public funds, the securitization, or the reform of the central banks in order to have better solvency ratios? So in your point of view, in your opinion, what should be what is the most interesting in order to go further? Thank you very much, Marie-Laure. I think that the other panelists said what was the most important to say. However, I can add that it is necessary to have a clear regulation and also a clear definition of what we call green finance, because it still needs to be fine-tuned. When it comes to UBA, we really try to follow the trend. It is obvious that we need to use more this new financing solution, which is appealing to everyone. As I said earlier, we started new actions using the Equator approach, and at the moment we are trying to participate in green bond issuances in Africa. I can also add that we should use the political, financial, and political levers necessary. And this way it will be possible for us to create a niche in order to make sure that the bond market could really put ahead the green bonds. Okay, so now I will ask his point of view to Gregory, and then we will close our session with the Minister Hott. So Gregory, you're working on the fostering of green bond issuances with your bank partners. How would it be possible for you to encourage them to structure even a bit more this market, especially on the issuances? Yes, of course, it would be necessary to boost this market and make sure that the finance industry really tries to use a little bit more of this kind of solutions. And we really try to attract new investors in order to buy titles issued by African issuers. So as Mr. Katani reminded us earlier, it is necessary to mobilize international savings from the pension funds, the insurance companies, and so on, and use it for green projects which could have an impact on the economy, which could have an impact on the development of the continent, and which will have a very positive influence on the climate. So as a development financial institution, we really try to raise funds, and it is exactly what we did with the Amundi Planet Fund. So when we talk about Amundi Planet, it is an asset manager and also another sponsor, which is the ASFI, and Proponco, thanks to them, managed to structure this fund, which represents $1.4 billion. So we had to play a key role. I won't delve into further details, but we have a mezzanine structure, and also in the fund we needed to really deeply work on that, and it allowed us to really help working with the flow of private investors. And what did we do with those resources? We decided to invest in green bonds issued by banks and financial institutions. The banks issued those bonds bought by the funds that we structured, and then the banks could finance green assets. So it is something that was extremely important and extremely interesting. It is something that we could do globally. We could also imagine the same mechanism locally, because you talked about the use of private savings. And I think that there is a lot of savings, private savings in Africa that could be put to good use, and in order to help to the financing of green projects and green infrastructures. So it is what we did. This fund was very long to structure, but now more than 50% of the fund has already been invested. Unfortunately, it doesn't lead to as many African investments as we wished, but I hope that we will be able to develop that. As I said before, upstream we really try to work with the banking sector, and we also try to provide accompaniment, technical accompaniment possibilities in order for the banks to finance more easily green assets. So upstream, we really try to act on the credit institutions' policies in order for them to find their positioning. Then we also finance live the green assets. And when it comes to the banks, as Mr. Ketani said, the bank has a financial statement, has equities, and if they want to go towards an acceleration, as the minister said, we need to give to the credit institutions the possibility to go beyond their own economic model and beyond their own intervention capacities. So that's why I talked about the guarantee process. Mr. Ketani talked about that again on Namibia, but it is possible to share the risk. It is possible as a tool to close the negotiations for big infrastructures. And I'm talking on behalf of Proparco, but I want to talk on behalf of everyone. We are a part of a very large ecosystem, and it is possible for us to work internationally. I talked about the IFC. We can talk about our German or British friends, or the STOA, for example. There are so many things that we can use, or so many institutions that we could use in order for everyone to go beyond our own intervention intervention scope. I would like to give the last word to the minister. So, dear minister, you have stakeholders of the private sector, but also people who have access to the public sector around this table, and we would really like to increase their action in the energy sector. So I would like to ask you what are the priorities and what you would like them to finance today and tomorrow in Senegal. Here you have panelists who are ready to work. Thank you very much. the different stakeholders really made a huge effort, sharing all the available tools with us, which is extremely important. And we are ready to work with the private sector. As I said before, there are already projects which are on the way. That's why we are currently dealing with an energy mix of 22% and our target for 2025 and an energy mix of 30%. I'm sure that we will be able to reach our target very soon. Among the projects that will allow us to reach our target will be a huge project of the hydropower plant in Famagalu. It's around 200 million euros, will be used by the different states of the EMBG. I would like to share as well that in Senegal, we are currently working with the strategic fund of sovereign investment for the creation of a mezzanine fund investing in energy projects, but also reinvest assets which are already present and already creating cash flows. So what we would like to do is to sell those cash flows to institutional investors, since they will be riskless. They won't present any risks. But first of all, we would need more regional or local African institutions accredited for the green climate funds. I think that we need more of them, and also we will need to have more resources in order to prepare the climate projects. Should we talk about the adjustment to the situation, because at the moment it has been a little neglected. We tried more to act in to mitigate the situation rather than adjusting to the situation. We need to go further on that, but in order to do that, we need new resources in order to have a better preparation of our projects and to make sure that all of our investors, Proparco or UBA and others, could really use their capitals and have assets to invest in. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you for participating in this panel. I think that green finance has a bright future in Africa, as it was mentioned by the different participants. I think that the energy sector, in particular, is one of the best financed sector in the planet, and especially in Africa. And I'm sure that it will have a very beautiful future, especially if we take into account all the associated linked elements, everything that is linked to the biomass and the development and the waste recycling, and also the project of rural electrification and the connectivity projects in order to connect energetically different countries in the continent. I would like to thank you for your active participation in this session, and thank you for the complementarity of the debates that we had the honor to watch today. I would also like to thank Jeune Afrique for this initiative in this complicated period of time. Everybody is trying to mobilize their network in order to go forward. Thank you very much. See you soon.